The security guards' boots crunched through fresh snow as they dragged Rebecca Mitchell and her hours-old daughter toward the iron gates, but the young mother's silk hospital gown offered no protection against the December storm that mirrored the coldness in her husband's eyes. Daniel Ross stood in the marble doorway of the Ross family mansion, the same mansion his parents, siblings, and cousins had worked their entire lives to afford through their positions at Meridian Global Industries, the $80 billion corporate empire that employed 3 generations of his family. But he had no idea that the trembling woman he was casting out was actually Rebecca Thornton, the secret daughter of billionaire Edmund Thornton, the very man who owned every building the Ross family had ever stepped foot in, every paycheck they'd ever cashed, every opportunity they'd ever received. The blonde woman in designer heels standing beside Daniel, his mistress Victoria Lang, threw her head back with laughter that echoed across the snow-covered grounds as Rebecca stumbled and nearly dropped her crying newborn. But that cruel sound would be the last moment of joy Victoria would ever know, because what Rebecca did next wouldn't just shock Daniel and destroy Victoria's dreams. It would devastate the entire Ross family and expose secrets that would unravel everything they thought they knew about power, loyalty, and the woman they'd treated like garbage. Daniel believed he was throwing out a broke, worthless wife who trapped him with a pregnancy, but he was actually destroying the one person who held his family's fate in her hands, and neither he nor his laughing mistress could have imagined that the shivering woman in the snow possessed the power to erase them all with a single phone call. So why had Rebecca hidden her true identity? What had she seen in Daniel that made her choose poverty over privilege? And what would she unleash now that the man she'd loved had chosen his mistress over his own newborn child? The champagne glass slipped from Daniel Ross' hand, but he caught it just before it shattered against the Italian marble floor. His reflexes, sharp from years of corporate training at Meridian Global Industries headquarters. 6 months ago, he'd stood in this same ballroom celebrating his promotion to Senior Vice President of Operations, surrounded by 3 generations of Ross family members who'd built their modest fortune through decades of loyal service to the Thornton Empire. But tonight, the crystal chandeliers cast shadows that seemed to judge him for decisions he couldn't take back. "You're distracted," Victoria Lang whispered, her red lips brushing his ear as her fingers traced the expensive fabric of his Tom Ford suit. But Daniel's attention remained fixed on the snow falling outside the floor to ceiling windows, each flake a reminder of that night 3 months ago when everything had changed, the night he'd ordered Rebecca removed from his life forever. Daniel's phone buzzed with another email from his father, Richard Ross, the director of international logistics, who'd given 38 years to Meridian Global Industries. But the message contained only 3 words that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Meeting tomorrow, Thornton." Edmund Thornton never requested meetings with mid-level executives, even senior ones, but the reclusive billionaire had specifically asked for Daniel by name, and nobody in the Ross family could understand why the owner of an $80 billion empire would want to speak with someone who'd only been with the company for 8 years. "Danny, are you even listening?" Victoria's voice pulled him back to the present, her irritation barely masked by her practiced smile. But Daniel had learned over the past 6 months that his mistress's moods shifted like winter weather, beautiful one moment, brutal the next. "I'm listening," Daniel lied, downing the rest of his champagne as memories of Rebecca flooded his mind, uninvited, unwanted, but impossible to suppress. He'd met her 4 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, far from gleaming Meridian Global Industries tower where his family had built their legacy. But Rebecca had been reading a worn paperback novel in the corner booth, her simple sundress and lack of jewelry suggesting she was as far from his world as possible. She hadn't recognized his name when he introduced himself, hadn't cared about his position or his family's reputation, but she'd looked at him with genuine interest when he'd talked about his dreams of designing sustainable urban infrastructure, dreams he'd abandoned years ago to climb the corporate ladder his family expected him to scale. She was nothing, Victoria said, reading his expression with the calculated precision she used in her own role as marketing director at Thornton Media Group, a subsidiary of Meridian Global Industries. But her dismissive tone only intensified the guilt that had been eating at Daniel since that December night, the night Rebecca had given birth to their daughter in the private wing of St. Catherine's Hospital. But Daniel had refused to visit because Victoria had convinced him the pregnancy was a trap, a scheme to tie him to a woman who would drain his resources and damage his reputation. His mother, Patricia Ross, who'd worked as executive assistant to 5 different Meridian Global Industries CEO over her 32-year career, had supported Victoria's assessment, but Patricia had always been more concerned with social standing than emotional truth. "Mr. Ross, your car is ready." The valet interrupted, but Daniel waved him away, suddenly unable to face the drive back to the penthouse he now shared with Victoria in the building his family could barely afford, despite their collective six-figure salaries from Meridian Global Industries. The memory of Rebecca's face haunted him, not angry, not bitter, but heartbroken in a way that suggested betrayal far deeper than infidelity.